Now, to the true video of today. And I took a note last time, but I realized I didn't want to overwhelm myself with like a lot of videos at once. I wanted time to process every video. So last time I think I did two videos at once, which were cool and very much doable, but I fear repetition every once in a while. Regardless of my thought process towards my videos, which definitely I should like I have like six videos I haven't watched since I started recording. I should like pick a day once where I actually watch them, take notes, and kind of like start. And I think right now is a good point, is a good timing. Because I have enough videos that are gonna be posted online on their own, they're on the schedule. Which kind of means after these two videos, I'm set for another for 4 extra days, regard whatever the schedule is. And I have some time actually to kind of go over some things. So yay. But today's conversation is about French and my mind. Ah, right. 20, I want to say about sometime in the early 2000s. A friend of my mom's, who's a writer, gave me a book of hers. It's called Mourir Sauvage. Sorry, man, I'm still in that phase where when I speak French, I tend to kind of butcher the accent, mainly on purpose. Because as kids, in order for us to be Lebanese, we were taught to make fun of the French speaking Lebanese. It's okay. I grew up in a village. But I was always interested in French and I learned enough. But throughout my life journey, the past 2 years, I realized that I have been casually okay with a lot of stuff. Like you know enough. You're more than a beginner, almost an intermediate, but not even close to being proficient in anything, right? Like you're familiar with stuff to a point where you're like, where you don't necessarily embarrass yourself. Like normally people do speak French. Je peux un peu de français. Je parle un peu de français, right? And then you ask them a couple of questions, you go like, that's it. And you got other people, man, that are like, I don't know, just a couple of extra sentences. But for me, I actually build sentences. I just do it very like poorly. And so I decided every day I read a piece of this book. And by a piece, I literally mean like a paragraph, depending on the mood. If it's a good mood, I read two paragraphs. And I used Google Translate to kind of like sort out the words I didn't know and kind of like get more familiar with the language. So one day, I was doing this routine, but I was in one of those like giggly moods. And I think maybe one of the kittens did something funny, or maybe I was high on life. But remember, I was reading, but I was reading out loud. Now, I don't think people understand the difference, but reading in your head is practically the same as practicing code in your head. It's practically the same as sending a text message in your head. We all have had those moments where you kind of write the text, you send it, and you go like, "What the fuck? No, delete or something like this." So when I was reading out loud, my pronunciation was super awkward, and I was like, "Fuck!" In my head, it sounds like very Frenchy, and then it kind of like clicked in a weird way, and be like, "No, my voice hasn't really been practicing what I have been practicing." Because in my mind, everything is set. I have literally been writing down, taking my notes. Everything is there. But when I vocalize it, there's some form of connection between my mind and my body that kind of is still weak. And so I just reasoned with that logic I just remembered right now I was high on life. I was definitely high on life. But I sat with myself and I started kind of like considering my voice when it comes to singing. And then the tones, the ups and downs. That this is legitimate practice. And when you speak French or when you know French, you're basically you have to be able to write proficiently, you have to be able to read proficiently, you have to be able to speak, to enunciate, to do all that stuff proficiently. It's not just I knew a few words. In fact, if anything, the last thing you should care about is the words, because ultimately your body is the one that's expressing the French that you know, or even expressing things in French logic, because their grammar is different than English, structured differently. So to think in French and to think in English are two completely different things. And I can speak Arabic already, and I'm a bit proficient in Spanish. So I chose French before Spanish specifically because French is an easier target to practice in Lebanon. Plus, we actually have resources. And Spanish comes later once I spend a couple of weeks in Spain. Almost every time I spend a couple of weeks in Spain, I kind of pick up again and I kind of build from there and all that good stuff. But anyway, so like my body, my physical existence requires this interaction with the French language before my mind does. And I'm not saying it's because my mind is not capable. In fact, my mind is fully capable. But the only way it's connected to this real world is my actual body, which means everything I've read in French up till now is stored in my mind somewhere and can be accessed. But I have to access it. And the only way I can express it is through this, which means the key to actually evolving, specifically right now, I'm talking about the language, but in almost anything, is your own ability to express your understanding when it comes to it. And from there, I started having this talk back and forth with myself, naturally, for a course of like, I think 20 minutes. I recorded most of it as well. And the conversation was literally explaining to myself how the words that are in my mind that make sense, once I speak them out loud, stop making sense. Because the entity that's exposed to it afterwards is the reality that does not necessarily exist in my mind. I'm exposing my creativity in French to the world. And as I progressed through like building the logic behind how my voice connects with my mind and how my eyes connect with my mind and how my basically mannerisms connect with my mind and how I myself am trying to express myself through myself, I came to a much simpler conclusion where most of the time when we're thinking, and I mentioned it in a couple of videos before, is you're standing in your own way, which literally means anytime you want to get better at something, it's the mundane tasks that you built into your own reality that are the ones that actually contribute to you being able to access the knowledge that you already have here and that already exists in the world. Which I don't like. Okay, so one of the physicists of the world, one of those people that spoke of the world, like spoke about learning in a very awkward way, and I really don't like that word, to learn something, because I mean knowledge is around us, it's everywhere, we're exposed to it every day. And for us to believe that our eyes that can process I don't know how many million pixels, but our our actual brain can only process about like a couple of thousand. Where are all these pixels going? Where's all this information going? Your mind's perfectly capable of processing it. You yourself, though, you're not. Your eye can process all this beautiful stuff. It's going somewhere, but it's kind of getting sifted back into the reality that you see. Most of it is junk, right? Like there's a lot of information that you don't really need, but you can still access it, and it's there. Whether it's a storyline that you saw once, an article you read, or something you did all the way back in school, there's always that trigger that kind of brings them back. And you go, like, oh, I remember we talked about this sometime. I think the teacher's name was. We've all had those moments. And I strongly came to believe that, like, being involved in an actual practice has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the persona that you kind of like created as you grew up, the ego, and allowing the ego to engage with it, because just engaging with it in your mind doesn't really reflect the way you would want it to, especially since I'm learning French because I want to speak French or use French or read books in French. Oh, man, you definitely want to read existentialist authors' work in French. Those guys are badass. Saying that, I also want to read Russian and Japanese, but Japanese is on the way. Don't worry about it. Maybe sometime in the future I'll get to the Russian part. But the goal is to be able to relinquish your thought process, because your thought process is probably the only thing that's triggered by you. Whilst the time comes when you are actually trying to get involved with something, all you need is just to be involved, and everything else could just be recalled from memory because your mind is awesome. And that's my story when I tried to speak French to myself and read out loud. And when I realized that what the fuck is wrong with me, in my head, everything makes sense and it sounds good. But the connection that it had with my physical presence was almost negligent. The minute I realized that, not even 2 weeks passed, I read much better out loud now. And on top of all of that, I can pronunciate and go through the words much faster. Because in my head, I never had to actually do that and pause and think of the words. But right now, like saying the words and saying them correctly is allowing me to kind of like my mind to dissect them and to slowly kind of build them up as it sees fit in order to properly explain what they mean and how I can use them. It is fascinating. I can't wait to finish this book to test my French with some people and then maybe just see what next I will want to do in order to like level up from intermediate to actually proficient in the language. Peace out.